The action session of the Board of School Commissioners for Thursday, August 27th. Would you all please stand and join me in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, this evening we have a couple of commissioners participating by phone pursuant to Governor Holcomb's Executive Order 20-9 and corresponding guidance from the Indiana Public Access Counselor. I'll remind my colleagues who are using the dial-in option to mute their microphones when they're not speaking to minimize any feedback or interference. We will, at all votes this evening, then therefore have a roll call vote. Mr. Mohan, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold?
Here.
Commissioner Gore? You may be on mute. Commissioner Gore?
Present.
Sorry, I couldn't hear him.
Commissioner Moore?
Here.
Commissioner Slack?
Commissioner Slack?
Thank you.
Commissioner Slack?
Secretary Collins?
Here.
Vice President Hawkins?
Present.
President O'Connor?
Here. And Commissioner Crickets is also joining us this evening, right? We will now adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Reviewing the agenda, are there any requests for changes to the agenda as presented? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those, do we need to take a roll call on this or no? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? The agenda is adopted. Special recognitions. We do not have any formal special recognitions to honor this evening, but I want to again thank all of our students, our staff, and our teachers to the for this all the hard work they put in for this unusual start to the 2020-2021 school year. And I want to thank the patience and support and understanding of the many parents who have been forced in the uncomfortable position of being the literal homeroom teachers to start the year as we're running through our virtual instruction. We know we're not operating under ideal circumstances and continue to be amazed by the resilience of the IPS community, our students, and our families. So thank you. Moving to Section 3, opening comments. Does any commissioner wish to offer opening comments this evening? Hearing none. Public comments. Again, pursuant to the governor's executive order to minimize the risk of exposure for members for the public sharing the same microphone at the podium, we will continue to receive public comment through our online portal. The public comment portal was activated on Monday, August 17th and remained open until 4 p.m. today. We received 3 written submissions, all of which are posted in our board docs in item 3.02 and are available for review by the media and the public. Moving to Section 4, General Obligation Bonds Public Hearing. The next item on the agenda is for the board to hold a public hearing on the proposed construction project. If you're interested in speaking at this hearing, for this, because it is a bond hearing, we will allow public comment. We would ask that you just approach the steps towards the board area here. Please make sure that if you sign the sign-in sheet at the front of the room, which should include your name and address, after presentation by the administration and its advisors, there'll be an opportunity for the public to make comments about the project. At the hearing, we'll ask that each person limit their comments to 3 minutes and that the topic be limited to the proposed project under consideration. The note of this hearing was published as legally required on August 14th, 2020 in the Indianapolis Star and in the Indianapolis Business Journal. At this time, I'll ask Mr. Mulholland to explain the purpose of this hearing.
Thank you, President O'Connor. Pursuant to Indiana Code Section 20-26-7-37, before a school corporation may spend more than $1 million to build, repair, or alter school facilities and equipment that will be financed by a lease or bond, it must hold a public hearing at which explanations of the potential value of the project to the school corporation and community are given. These public hearings and the adoption of resolutions are the very beginning of the legal process. These resolutions establish the maximum financial terms for the proposed project.
We'll now hear from IPS Chief Financial Officer Weston Young about the process of determining and communicating the project to the community and the need for the project, and from our advisors at Baker Tilly about how the proposed project will be financed, as well as information about the effect on the typical property taxpayer.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Connor. So tonight we're going to have the general obligation bond public hearing. We're going to explain what a general obligation bond is, why the additional capital is needed, the framework of the general obligation bonds that we're asking for, and then summarize our need again. We have a GeoBond process, and we wanted to find out and confirm what the definition is, make sure there's a good understanding of that. So a GeoBond is backed by the full faith and credit of the board. It's a pledge to utilize tax revenues to repay the bondholders, and it's subject to an Indiana legal limit. The GeoBond is not supported by a project or fee revenue, and it's also not a first mortgage bond, which is leased from the building corporation. The purpose of the capital and the use of the capital would be to fund technology purchases related to our one-to-one technology and connectivity initiatives. Since March 2020, our district has spent $16.5 million on iPads, Chromebooks, and MiFis to support the one-to-one technology initiative. Since then, many people have said they'd like to help, and that funding has not generated 100% of coverage of that cost yet. And at this time, we believe it's the right thing to do to issue the bonds to cover a third of the cost of that $16.5 million, netting about $5.2 million. So the process we've undertaken is that in May 2020, we had the bond adopt a reimbursement resolution, which allowed us to go back 60 days from that time frame to basically, if we've paid for something related to this initiative, we could reimburse ourselves and pay back ourselves with the bond proceeds that we receive in the future. So that is a reimbursement resolution that is in place as of May 2020. Tonight, we're having a public hearing where we're adopting a project resolution and also a preliminary bond resolution. In September, we will hold another hearing where we are going to request adoption of additional appropriation, basically an authorization to spend to support that need, and then also an adoption of a resolution to issue the GEO bonds. Subsequent to September, we plan in October to sell the bonds, and in November receive the bond proceeds, with the first bond payment being in January 2021. So again, to summarize, we believe all IPS students in 2021 need a computer and connectivity to the internet, and this project will allow that to happen. We believe that this will be the right thing to do to protect in a time of downturn, economic downturn, and uncertainty about funding, to protect our education and operation balances.
Any questions for Mr. Young? Commissioner Moore.
Thank you, Weston. I have a couple questions. Okay, so well, I'm very, very happy that IPS has made the decision to extend the funding for one-to-one for our children, because we all know that they have had this need and will continue to in the future. Can you tell me approximately how much money the foundation received? Because I knew that was one of the things that they were doing as part of their equity funding, was helping us with our technology. Do we have any idea as of today how much we have received, or how much they have received that we will receive of this $17 million?
I believe the IPS Education Foundation, I think is what you're talking about.
That is correct.
Yeah, with the Education Equity Fund, I believe it's up to $600,000 that's been gifted to the IPS Education Foundation at this time.
So $600,000.
Yes.
Yeah, that is kind of short. However, I want to go on record as saying I want to thank everybody who did contribute, those individuals who called me and told me they were going to contribute, some of those minority and women-owned businesses. So I want to thank our community for supporting, but I also hope they also heard that we have a $17 million debt, and we've only received $600,000, right? Is that what I heard you say? Yes. So we are very thankful for the $600,000, and we sure hope we can get to that 16 point whatever million dollars. I'll just say 17 million. Thank you.
Keep those cards and letters coming, right?
That's right.
Any other questions for Mr. Young? Commissioners on the phone, oops, I'm sorry, Commissioner Collins, and I'll go to the commissioners on the phone.
Weston, I need a little bit more understanding of how how bonds work. Who are they sold to? Are they sold to banks or to who? And
Yeah.
how do they work?
Yes, investors will be buying the bonds. So you might have an investor who's looking for a very stable credit, which IPS is, and that they will get their money back and then some with interest. Those are the types of people who will be buying our bonds.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners Gore or Slack on the phone, do you have any questions for Mr. Young?
I am very appreciative of what we have received so far. Could you repeat that statement for me? How much we spent on the one-to-one tablets, please, and Chromebooks for our kids?
Since March 2020, we have spent $16.5 million on iPads, Chromebooks, and MiFis.
Thank you, and I'm appreciative of that investment to our kids, and I hope the community is as well, and they continue to give. Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, we'll now take, we'll now open the public hearing. Remember, if you'd like to speak, please sign in on the sheet, which is located at the table in front of Mr. Mulholland in front of the room. As I mentioned earlier, we ask that you state your name and address, limit your comments to the proposed project and financing, and keep your comments to 3 minutes and avoid being repetitive if possible. Mr. Mulholland, do we have anybody who has signed up to speak this evening?
Not at this time.
Hearing or seeing none, thank you to all who have participated in this hearing. We appreciate your time and interest. Please note this is just the first step in the legal process. The board will continue to work with the administration and its professionals to look for efficiencies to conserve tax dollars while meeting our educational needs. Mr. Holland, could you please summarize the project resolution?
The project resolution posted to Board Docs is required when the school is planning to spend more than $1 million for the facility or type of project. It contains the estimated hard and soft construction costs and the costs of issuance and establishes the total project cost. It also contains the estimated tax impact.
And so for purposes this evening, we're actually breaking this down into the project resolution and the preliminary bond resolution. So we'll take 2 actions. So as Mr. Mulholland has explained the project resolution, do I have a motion to approve or to adopt the project resolution?
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
No roll call, he said.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. We will need to do a roll call this evening.
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Now I think you explained the preliminary bond resolution.
The preliminary bond resolution contains the overall project costs, maximum interest rate, and other financial terms such as the first interest payment date and maturity dates of the bond.
Do I have a motion to adopt the preliminary bond resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Mr. Mulholland, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
Yes.
Motion carries by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you all. We will now adjourn the bond public hearing and return to our regular meeting agenda. Item 5 is the consent agenda. Reviewing the items on the consent agenda, are there any questions or requests to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Do we need to do a roll call on this vote, or can we do a, okay. So it has been moved and seconded. Mr. Mulholland, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
Yes.
The motion carries.
This evening, there are no board reports, so I will turn the agenda over to Superintendent Johnson.
Thank you, President O'Connor. Good evening. There are 3 superintendent reports to be presented this month. Item 7.01 is our school spotlight. So as has been the custom the last 2 years, we ask one of our school leaders to share information about their school with commissioners so that you're able to get a more on-the-ground feel for what's happening across our district. I am excited to welcome Amanda Milliken, who's the principal at George Buck School 94, who will share about her school, their planning, and specifically response efforts in the context of COVID-19. Welcome, Amanda. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening, Superintendent Johnson and Board of School Commissioners. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you. A little nervous, so I apologize. So first of all, I just want to say that I'm the proud principal of George Buck Elementary, which is a school on the east side of Indianapolis, and we are also part of the Transformation Zone. And today I'm going to be sharing with you just some of the highlights that we've had throughout the year. And these things actually began back in March when we transitioned to home learning. Today we'll be focusing on, I'm sorry if you can go, thank you. We'll be focusing on who we are at George Buck, how do we build a strong community, what do we do to foster a strong learning environment. Next slide, please. George Buck Elementary was named after the principal of Shortridge from 1910 to 1941. He was known as a respected and kind, generous principal that led civic duties on the east side of Indianapolis. Next slide. So when we think about who we are at George Buck, the first thing we are champions for students. And the ways that we do that is, number one, we have professional learning communities for all of our instructional staff. A lot of times when you're looking at the components of a building, you have PLCs for your certified staff in the sense of your teachers. But we thought it was very important, especially during remote instruction, that we provide PLCs for our classified staff, which are our instructional assistants as well. So they have the opportunity to collaborate with the classroom teachers every single day throughout the week to make sure that when they're providing small group instructions to students, they're coming with the same skill set that the teachers may be able to offer as well. The second thing that we focus on is our community circle. We know that many of our students are coming from traumatic backgrounds and that they have had many challenges while they've been away from us. And so we feel it is important to make sure that we are incorporating social emotional learning every day for our students. And so built into our schedule, we have 30 minutes in which we use the Second Steps curriculum. The third thing is our intervention block. We know that with students being out of the building and especially being out of in-person instruction since March, that we're definitely going to have some gaps within our instruction. And so therefore, every single day for 30 minutes, students have the opportunity to work in small groups with their teacher or with the classroom assistant, but also receive some differentiated instruction through some online support such as Lexia and Dreambox. And the last thing that we're focusing on is our tier support for our students and staff. And so what that tier support looks like for students is through our intervention block, and then as well as students have the opportunity to have small group instruction twice a day through their reading and math block. And I'll be speaking more about how we differentiate our support for our staff later on. Next slide, please. So when we think about building a strong school community, we know that we have to, number one, be connected, and number two, stay informed. And so this is how we focus on our school community. The first thing we did when we left in March for home learning, we knew that we had to find a way to stay connected with our parents. And so we began to use Class Dojo. For those of you who are not aware of Class Dojo, it is an online platform in which we're able to communicate with parents through messaging. We can also share stories, share pictures, just really making sure that we continue to stay a family. And so for us, that was very important that we did that throughout the entire summer, even when school ended in June. We continue to do that, and we were able to share communication about our school, what was happening at the district level, but also what were some of those immediate needs that families had. So we were able to share items such as, how do you get rental assistance if you were having challenges with COVID-19? What were some of the local pantries that were available to provide food for students? But then also, what were some ways that you can stay connected with your teacher for the following school year? And so we did have our incoming teachers for the 2020-21 school year set up communication with their new students so that communication can continue on when we came back to school in August. And then the last thing is our collaboration. We were grateful to have a collaboration with Stanford Children throughout the 2019-20 school year. But when we went to home learning in March, we knew that that had to intensify. And so we began to have virtual meetings every week in which Stan community would kind of ask what was happening at the district level, how did that apply to George Buck Elementary, and then how could they support our families in the community. And from that, we realized that we really needed support for our Spanish-speaking families. Even though we were still providing communication through Class Dojo, which allows parents to translate those things in their native language, we realized that our Spanish-speaking families didn't really, there was still like a cultural blockage there. And so we wanted to make sure that someone was able to provide them with some hands-on experience. And so we were able to create a WhatsApp group with our Stand for Community Partnerships, and they were able to meet every week with our Spanish-speaking families. And from there, we were able to create parent advocates that would then begin to take this information from George Buck and share it out in the Spanish Oaks community, which is where most of our ESL families are coming from. Through that, we were also able to partner with some of our Haitian families, and we were able to create a Haitian advocate within the school. And so he was also able to take that information that was being shared in the WhatsApp group and then provide that information to our Haitian families as well. So we are very thankful for our collaboration with Stanford Children. Next slide, please. Still building a strong sense of community, we know that we had to be prepared for our students coming back for remote instruction. And so even though we just talked about one-to-one devices, we know that we had to do more than put devices in students' hands. We also had to give them the supplies and equipment to make sure that they had effective instruction happening at home. And so not only did students receive a Chromebook or an iPad, but they also received school materials such as manipulatives for our primary students. They received paper, notebooks, but then we were so thankful to also receive a micro grant from the IPS Foundation. And through that, we were able to provide our students with art supplies. This is the first year at George Buck that we've had art in our building. Well, I wouldn't say for probably the first within 3 years. And so we didn't want our kids to miss out on that opportunity to be able to experience art at home. And so through an IPS Foundation grant, we were able to send home with every student crayons, colored pencils, glue, watercolor paints, watercolor paper, and other supplies to make sure that they were able to experience art at home as well. The next thing that we did to make sure that our families felt connected to us is we had our virtual back to school night. And so we want to continue doing those things with our parents. One of the things that parents lifted up is that they would like to have some monthly town halls as well as some more back to school nights so they can still stay connected with us. And we're definitely having those plans in the works. And then the last thing that we did was helping parents navigate remote instruction. And so we know as teachers on our end and as educators, it's been somewhat of a challenge of making sure that we know how to navigate Schoology, Clever, Teams, and some of the other platforms. And so if our staff was having some challenges, we also know that our parents and families are going to have those challenges as well. And so not only do we have some things in the works for some one-on-one opportunities for families to come in to have some gradual release support in the sense where we model it for you, we practice it with you, and you do it on your own. But we were lucky enough that Stanford Children partnered up with our bilingual assistant, and in a safe location, they were able to provide support to 25 of our Spanish-speaking families and showing them how to navigate the technology so that when we started school on August 17th, the kids knew exactly where to go for live instruction, how to get to their teacher's Schoology page, how to get to Clever. And so those 25 families were then able to partner up with other families within our community to show them how to be successful in doing that. Next slide, please. So now that we've talked about our students and our families, I want to now talk about the staff. And so we're talking about how do we foster a strong learning environment. And once again, we want to think about how are we connected and how do we stay informed. As you may know, Teacher Appreciation happens in May. And so our teachers are out of the building in March. And so we really didn't have the opportunity to celebrate our teachers like we wanted to. And so I was very intentional on making sure that this school year, every month is Teacher Appreciation Month. And so when teachers came back in August, they were welcomed with a gift basket. This past week, they were honored with Girl Scout cookies. When they come back in September, next week, they'll be honored with some school spirit wear. I just really want them to know that they are the rock stars, that they are the foundation of the school, and we can't wait to March or May to celebrate them. They need to know every single day that they're appreciated. And so for us, that's one of the ways that we're gonna stay connected because we know that through the trauma that they perhaps face at home or while they were away. They need that love and care just as we're giving to our students. The next one is communication. And so over the summer, as well as definitely most recently, it was important that teachers receive regular communication. So we did that through Teams and Zoom meetings. We did that through emails and things. So as the district was pushing out initiatives at the district level, we were also looking to see how does that affect George Buck Elementary. So teachers knew and staff knew exactly what does that mean at the building level. And then the last thing is it was important to collaborate. We know that we cannot do this job alone, and therefore we have to collaborate with one another. And so in June, we began our leadership team, and from there we were able to develop some great ideas to continue throughout the school year to support students and teachers. And then in July, we started our PBIS team. And so right now, we're just navigating on how we can continue to acknowledge our students while they're at remote instruction, because we know that that's going to be very important for them. Next slide, please. Preparation is key when thinking about fostering a strong learning environment. So the first thing that we started with was developing our master's schedule. And it was important that our students received highly effective instruction throughout the day. We wanted to make sure that we did not shortchange our students, that we did not give them opportunity that was not going to be beneficial for them. And so we ensured that all students not only receive live instruction throughout the day for reading, math, social studies, science, as well as community circle, intervention block, but they also have the opportunity for small group instruction based on their needs. Then we think about the teachers on the one-to-one. So when teachers came back on July 31st, we knew that this was going to be the first time that they really had the opportunity to talk about where they left out in March and where they were on July 31st. And so every single teacher had the opportunity to meet with the coach one-on-one to first reflect on how they ended the year and then think about what were their current needs. Was it going to be with providing effective instruction? Was it going to be navigating technology? Was it going to be trying to engage students or working with parents? Because we wanted to make sure that the support we provided staff was tiered. And then on August the 10th through the 12th, we had professional learning communities that was based on the trends that we saw during the one-on-one session. So we took that data and we said, these are the things that the teachers identified that they needed immediate access to, and so we tailored our PLCs so that teachers would be successful when the kids came back. And then the last thing that we did on August the 13th and 14th, we created mock virtual sessions, and teachers had the opportunity to actually provide lessons in a remote setting. And so, of course, there were no kids present, but it was beneficial for teachers because they had the opportunity to navigate the technology, they had the opportunity to play with the equipment that they were going to be using, and then we were able to give them immediate feedback on if I was a student, what did that look like to me, what were some things that you were missing, what were some bright spots that you had, because we wanted our teachers to be fully prepared when kids came back on the 17th. Next slide, please. So once again, I am the proud principal of George Buck Elementary. Thank you for inviting me here tonight to be the spotlight. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Arnold?
What are the demographic breakdown of your, so I know you talked about Haitian students. Tell me a little bit about what your population looks like.
Yep, so we were roughly, I would say, about 70% African-American students, and then we have about 25% of Spanish-speaking families, and then a small percentage of a Haitian family. That population is increasing, and then less than 5% Caucasian students. You're welcome. And then just want to add on to that, within the ESL population, we do have languages of Spanish, French, Haitian Creole, as well as Portuguese.
Commissioner Collins?
That brings me another question. How do you communicate with those parents? I know we generally think Spanish and English, but I know teachers aren't generally prepared to speak French, or especially virtually when they're doing the lessons.
So one of the things that all staff members are asked to do is create a Google Voice account, and that way they're not using their personal cell phone number. And we use Class Dojo and texting a lot, and we know that our families can just copy and paste that into Google Translate, or on Class Dojo, it actually has a translate feature.
Commissioner Collins?
Well,
Go ahead, Commissioner Gore.
Find that you're working very hard with your school, and thank you for all of your work during these unprecedented times. I'm sorry that I didn't hear the grade level of your school. What grades do you go to?
We are kindergarten through 6th grade.
It was K through 6.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
K through 6, Commissioner Gore.
Okay, 3 through 6, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question, during your virtual back-to-school night, how did you find your parents? Did they all sign in, or how did that go at that point?
Right. So what we did notice is that we did not have the turnout that we wanted to see, but we know that our parents are asking to have those things more frequently. And so during the time that we had it, it was in the middle of the day. So we know that some of our parents are not necessarily available during that time. And so we will be doing town halls every month. So we do have one planned for the first week in September, in which we'll be inviting parents to join us for town halls at different times throughout the day. And so our percentage rate was not as high as we wanted to be, but we definitely know that we have tons of room for growth.
Okay, thank you. Very good way to try to keep up with your families.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Collins.
Thank you, Principal Milken, for putting in place some good procedures and wrapping around your whole community in all their needs. And I just wanted to show appreciation to you for doing the good work.
Thank you.
I know that it's been rough and difficult, and I have been in School 94 before, and with all the diversity there, just keep the faith.
Thank you.
And good job. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you again, Principal Milliken, for your presentation. I did not detect any nervousness. I thought you did an excellent job. So,
Thank you.
And so you nailed most of my questions, but I do have one question that may lead to a second question.
Okay.
So were you the school leader at the school last year?
Yes, last
Okay.
year was my first year.
Okay, last year was your first year?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess my question is with the abrupt sort of ending of the last school year going into the fall, what have you sort of learned about yourself, about your team shifting into the fall? I guess I'm just curious. To be honest, you're one of the first school leaders I've actually had a chance to speak to in the 9 days that we've been up and running, and so I have all kinds of questions for school leaders, but I'm just interested in what have you shifted and changed from an approach standpoint, or what are you maybe sort of coaching or mentoring your teachers to think about from what was different from the spring semester now going into fall?
Right. So I would say we've actually just hit the ground running with best instructional practices. Typically, when you start a school year, you're heavily focused on the culture and climate of the building. You're trying to make sure that kids are following expectations within the building. And so we don't necessarily have a lot of those challenges. We do have, some expectations that kids need to follow in the virtual remote setting. So we just hit the ground running with instruction and our PLCs and coaching. And so the thing that we've just held tight is, number one, I have 2 instructional coaches as well as a student support coordinator in my building where they are designated to support specific teachers. So the teachers are extremely happy this year that they have someone directly supporting them besides myself. So that's been very nice. And then we've been in teachers' classrooms every day. I want to say this past Tuesday, we did our second round of instructional rounds. And so just really focusing on what does the best practice look like for Tier 1 instruction. One of the things that we've been honing on is that remediation is not the answer. If you're not doing effective instruction the first time around, we can't keep depending on remediation. And so we've really just been honing on what is effective what is effective Tier 1 instruction looks like. And so today, for example, teachers got their lesson plan feedback. And so part of that lesson plan feedback was, what are you doing in your I do for your gradual release? Do you have a strong I do so that students understand the skill or whatever you're trying to teach them? So we focus on that. Another component that we've really been focusing on is how are we assessing students? We know that with technology, it is difficult when we talk about our little babies, perhaps trying to take a picture of their work or show their work, but are we being intentional in our lesson planning to say, I'm going to check for understanding by doing this, so that even though I may not be able to capture the work from the student, but I'm still being intentional of asking the right questions, having kids dig deeper, saying things such as, tell me more, or how do you explain that, or what evidence did you use from the text? So we've really just hit the ground running with instruction because we do know that when kids return, if we don't have our expectations up here with instruction, then we're just going to drop the ball, and we know that's not possible. We want the best for our kids. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Moore.
Thank you for coming. I
Thank
just
you.
have a couple questions. Are all your teachers doing their instruction from the classroom and not from home?
It's mixed. I would say that the majority of our teachers are providing instruction in the classroom. There's a few that have chosen to work remotely, but for the most part, they're in the building.
When we talk about accessing our, evaluating our students, how are the parents evaluating our, our responses to their children's needs? And once you tell me that, then tell me what has been the outcome of that? What are parents saying? I know it's only been a week.
So one of the things that, and I actually did not have it to share today, but one of the things that Stanford Community did is they just had a parent reach out here recently where they reached out to parents to kind of get a feel for how were things going during the first week of instruction. And we received a lot of positive feedback. One of the things that they did say is that we've been in communication with them every single week as regards to what's happening at the school level. We're very good about calling them directly, walking them through the process for instruction. We do know that there are some challenges that families are facing when we talk about parents that are waiting on the MiFis or parents that need support with navigating the instruction, but they have been extremely patient, they've been extremely gracious, and so I would say that I have nothing but great things to say about our families, and I think they have similar things to say about us as well.
I could feel the love coming, so I'm sure they have a lot of positive things to say about you. So as we, can I keep talking? Okay, so.
Floor is yours.
So as we look at where we're going, over the next several weeks or months, however long we have to do this. So did we evaluate where our children may have had some drop off from the March time to now, and how are we addressing those things in our classroom?
So the first set of I guess you can say standardized testing will be the NWA testing that hasn't taken place yet. And so we will know, specific data regarding students for that, so that doesn't happen for another couple of weeks. But we'll definitely be able to have concrete data to say, this is where kids ended at the middle of the year, this is where they are now, and then what type of supports we're going to put into place for them. But currently, because we already have built into our schedule time for remediation, intervention, small group instruction, those things are already happening right now.
And Commissioner Moore, I'll just add to that, the NWEA, which is the test Principal Milliken was referring to, that'll be open across all of our schools. That window opens at the beginning of September. So that's where we'll get that first sort of data capture in terms of where students are currently.
And one last time, I promise, this is my
All
last
yours.
question. So if I'm a parent and I have a need, I think my child has a need for mentoring and that he needs a little bit more, what do they do and what is our response?
So I would say probably all of our students are, and when you say mentoring as far as academic needs or?
Yes, academic needs.
Academic needs. So one of the things that is going to be important during our intervention block is to make sure that that teacher is planning time to work with certain groups of students that are within, I would say, the same skill set as far as their skill level on the test. And so teachers during their intervention block, they not only have the support of the ESL teacher that supports students that do not speak English as a first language. They also have the support of the special education teacher, and then that leads the kids who are considered general education students that need additional support. And that allows us to have smaller groups, and so students will have the opportunity to not only work in a small group with the teacher, but then they will also have online interventions through Dreambox and Lexia. So Dreambox is a math intervention, and it captures where kids are, and then based on that, it provides differentiated lessons for students to go on that they can do independently on their laptop or on their iPad. And then Lexia is the same way, except for it focuses on reading skills. So if I'm not in front of a teacher getting that small group instruction based on my deficits, then I also have an online platform that's going to support me, and it's going to be tiered just for me.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Hawkins.
All right, I'm back. I have one more question for you. I know that the administration in the district, we're sort of, working through sort of enrollment and to see how that's all shaken out. Takes a few days and weeks to kind of work that through. But from your lens, from an enrollment standpoint, when you think about students who were enrolled last year, now enrolled this year, can you talk about, sort of the percentage ballpark of who have returned, and then a little bit about maybe those that haven't returned, or that maybe there have been other cases where we haven't been able to make contact, kind of what the efforts might be.
So right now, we do have a significant percentage of our students who are considered no-shows. And those are students who have already, they've received phone calls or contact through our social worker as well as our culture and climate specialist on trying to locate our students. We do know that we've had some students who have changed their boundaries, so they're living in a different school district. And then we also know that we do have some students who are waiting on a MiFi device so that they have internet access to be able to join the class. But we're still in constant communication with those families, so we still have our social worker reaching out every week to those families to kind of give a progress on, and that's if we have their contact information, to say, this is where we are, where are you at, how can I support you to make sure that you're participating in the instruction that's happening. Our classroom teachers are reaching out as well. Like I said, we're very active on our Class Dojo page, but that's definitely one of the things that is an immediate need for us, is making sure that we locate all of our students so that they're all a part of the process.
Commissioner Slack, I don't know if you have any questions or not, but I didn't want to pass over you without the opportunity.
Yes, I did. I was kind of waiting to jump in there. Okay, I do have a couple questions. I want to say, first of all, thank you for coming. I appreciate you coming out, talking about your school. I've been in your school, and that's challenging, and I'm glad that you're there. I appreciate you for being there and showing your leadership. I just have a question about partnerships. Do you have any other partnerships that are standing behind you right now to help you out?
So I want to say last year within our community council, we had several partnerships with CAFE, the Immigration Center. We also had Stand for Children, which I mentioned. We worked with the IRT. We work with the mentoring group for males, Girl Scouts. But currently, right now, and that community council will be resuming those meetings in September. We've actually had a couple of community council members reach out and say they're ready to get the ball rolling, so we're excited about that. Currently, though, we have been strategically working with Stand for Children because we know that they have really been working with our parents throughout the whole school year and providing parent sessions on a weekly basis. And so we just wanted to make sure that our parents were connected and our families were connected to what was happening in the school. And then we'll begin to enlist the support of our other community members to make sure that we're on the same page.
Great, great. I do want to ask you about your teacher assistants. I guess I'm asking as a parent, how are you your teacher assistants at your school? I know you did mention small groups, so I'm wondering, how are you navigating that? Are you getting off of the Zoom call or off of Teams and getting back on Teams? Is the assistant on another team meeting with the small group? How is that working out for your school?
Thank you for asking that. So one of the capabilities of Teams is that you can create channels, also known as breakout rooms. And so as a general ed classroom teacher, and I'm going to say, let's say that I'm a kindergarten teacher, I will have a general channel in which all my kids will be present in that room. And then when it's time for us to go into our small group sections, students will virtually move into a breakout group, and so they're known as channels within Teams. And so you'll still be a part of the entire class remotely, but then you're able to go into a different channel so that you're working in a smaller group with an instructional assistant or the special education teacher or the ESL teacher, and then you're able to return back to the whole group.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. I was just also want to ask about one more thing. I know you did mention the social workers and enrollment, and I want to know about the attendance. I know that now we have to be a lot more intentional about our attendance, things of that nature. How's that working out?
So right now, as kind of like I mentioned before, our attendance is not exactly where it needs to be. I want to say, when we're in-person instruction, we had probably about 95% for our attendance rate. We're a little bit lower than that, and so part of that is making sure that students are in attendance for the whole day, making sure that they are joining us at the 9 o'clock hour, and then that they're with their teacher throughout the day for full instruction, but then also making sure that they have internet access. And so we've been very adamant in making sure that our parents have the MiFis ordered, and so we know that it's a slow process, but we're definitely, continue that process.
Well, I appreciate you coming out tonight, and I know that you're kind of being put in the hot seat because we can't ask all the other schools the same exact questions. So I appreciate you for your honesty and being out tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Principal Milliken.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Principal Milliken. Our next item, item 7.02, is the quarterly finance update. I'd welcome Weston Young to present the update on the district's financial state in quarter 4 of our fiscal year. As you know, we regularly update the board each quarter on our financial status, so I will turn it over to Weston.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. Good evening again, Commissioners. that time again to review quarterly finance, but this is an opportunity for us to review a year in review because June 30 was the end of our fiscal year. We'll look at the board appropriated funds, our cash balances, our activity for the supplier diversity spend so far year to date for the calendar year. We'll look at some budget updates, review what happened in 1920, where we are in 2021, and then also future beyond. And then also just revisit the conversation we had last quarter about the impact of COVID-19 on school finances, generally across the state, across our nation, but also how does that impact us here in Indianapolis Public Schools. So again, just want to highlight the three boxes at the bottom. Just want to just point out this opportunity to speak quarterly is to share and maintain our financial and operational transparency. And that's a goal that we have. We want to make sure we highlight that. We're trying to provide timely financial updates to stakeholders. There are so many people looking for information, the different types of information, but we believe this is a consistent manner which has been able to provide a timely response to the information available. And then also to communicate progress on new initiatives. There's a lot going on. I've been with the district for just now 5 years and been excited to be a part of some of those initiatives that we've accomplished so far, but there's so many yet to come. So look forward to highlighting some of those as well. The first slide showing the expenditures for the fiscal year ending June 2020. We have our total funds for education, operations, and operating referendum fund. What I want to point out here is you'll see the budget amount total for the year was about $406 million. Our total spend over the course of the year was $403 million. If you break that down into the specific spend categories, we have general fund, general education, special education, innovation payments, and educational support. Those are 4 categories that are primarily funded by the education fund. Many of those numbers that you'll see in the graph are higher than what the budget was and also what the prior year was. That's mainly because of the increase in compensation that the district was able to push through with the support of the operating referendum dollars and also the collective bargaining agreement with the teachers union. The other categories, capital projects, transportation, and administration, went the other way. And it's a good direction. They went down. There was less spending. Cause of that, some of it being COVID, and we'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. The next slide, we highlight and break it down with the education operations and operating referendum funds, but we also include the referendum, or we include the revenue. So on the previous slide, it was only expenditures, but what you'll see here is the revenue at the top and the expenditures at the bottom. And really, what I want to focus in on is the referendum revenue that is in that third line. So that $30 million that's coming in for the actual, that's providing that support to have the expenses of $402 million. At the end of the year, we had a net balance of net income across those funds of $21 million. Without the referendum proceeds, we would have a negative $9 million loss. So just want to make that, the reason for this slide is to highlight the role the operating referendum proceeds allow the district to pursue our initiatives and our goals. So the next slide captures the beginning balance, the actual revenues, the transfer from education operations fund. It also captures the actual expenses, ending with the net cash flow for that fund, and in particular the ending cash balance. What we want to make sure is that our cash balances at the beginning and end of the year are sufficient to meet our needs. Our goals are set up by the cash balance policy set by the board, being 1 month to 3 months of expenses in each of those funds. What we show here is that the education fund at the end of the year has 11% of the education expenses for the year. So 11% is good. It's about 1.5 months of cash in hand. It meets the policy that we have in place. Additionally, the operations fund is at 54%. 54% is almost half a year, but you have to remember that the operations fund receives its property taxes every 6 months. So that buffer, just in the case, if there would be a downturn or a delay in the property taxes, which happened this year for many districts, unlike IPS, who actually received majority of its property taxes by June 30. That 54% is high, but because of the funding structure of that fund, I believe it's very, very healthy and very, very stable, and helps us as a district to weather the storms when there are delays. But overall, across those funds, about 20%, again, 20%, about 3 months worth of cash. Again, heading into a time where there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns about the revenue at the state level, and also long-term with our real estate tax through the property taxes. You'll see at the bottom there, highlighting some of the talking points of the why. You know, why do we have a net income of $21 million versus what we may have projected earlier in the year? Well, a couple of things. You know, we celebrated the students that came to our district, and we had the highest student enrollment, and dollars follow kids. We had strong net assessed value growth, leading to higher property taxes than what was anticipated. This year, we sold 3 properties for a total of $5 million. That was, you know, we wanted to do it, but it was not in the budget. It was not planned. So we had $5 million of additional revenue. And then also capital projects that were previously funded out of the operations or capital projects fund are now being funded out of some debt that we've issued strategically, one specifically being the capital referendum debt that we've issued, but also the 2018 GEO bonds that we issued in 2018. So capital projects is less because they're getting paid by debt versus the operations fund. Fifth, there was a reduction in the use of the facilities and transportation during the COVID response in March through June. So there were some reductions in transportation, some reductions in utilities, some reductions in staffing at that time. Not as much overtime, things like that. But we have to remember also, there's been a lot of work on operational efficiencies. You know, we've been trying to reduce costs where it makes sense to support the needs of the operation, but do it, you know, do it smarter, do it better. And so we want to also give credit to some of the projects we've been working on with that. The cash balances have, at 6/30, rose a little bit since the last year, mainly because of some of the debt proceeds that we have received in the year. So at the end of the 6/30/2020 year, we had $173 million across the various types of funds. When it comes to supplier diversity, I want to highlight that in the last few years, we've averaged about 11% of supplier diversity spend with certified minority business owners. This year, the 6 months year to date, January through June, it's dipped a little bit to 6%. You know, not going to say COVID was the total reason, but there's been delays in the work that we've been doing with some of the projects that actually are tied in with some of the minority vendors we have. But what we're doing specifically with some of our procurement is working in more and more conversations about supplier spend, certified spend. And one of those I want to highlight is in the general purchasing report, where the custodial and instructional supplies, we had an RFP. And this is an RFP where we're trying to consolidate to one vendor all of the custodial spend, not piecemeal, onesie, twosie, threesie, foursy. And a minority vendor is being recommended and hopefully is approved for the the custodial supplies. And so what we're going to see within that specific spend category is, you know, 11% savings in costs, but that savings and all that spend going to a minority vendor. So we're excited about that, and those are more and more strategically being placed into our procurements. The next couple of slides we highlight on an annual basis when we have, you know, the annual revenue, annual expenditures to finalize. This slide highlights the ongoing continued funding gap for our kids with special needs. So we have 2 areas. We have SPED, special education, and our ELL population, our English language learners. Over the course of the last 5 years, what we've documented in the records of the state reporting that we do, we've had costs in the range of $45 to $50 million, with revenues from federal and state revenues being in the $26 million this last year. So on average, the 5-year gap of funding is about an $18 million gap. The ELL funding costs this year were about $9.3 million, with revenues coming in about 3.3. That's similar to an average 5-year of $6.5 million of funding gap. So total across special education and ELL, there's a continued 10% hit to the education fund to support students that have special needs. This year, a total of $25 million. We also want to highlight the work that across functional teams, different work streams of the district, revenues have increased and been sustained over the course of the last 5 years. In particular, interest income. For a time, interest rates actually were rising a bit. Now they're in the tank again. But over the course of the last year, we sustained, when we have cash balances and we're strategically deploying them, we had $2.7 million of interest income. Our textbook rental and IDOE reimbursement remains at that 1.7, 1.8, even when we're not reimbursing we have not adopted textbooks. Now we are, and I think we're going to start seeing some more revenue in there. Medicaid reimbursement, big kudos and shout outs to the special education team, the unified supports team, on the processes and procedures that teachers, administrators drive revenue by documenting the service of the student, and the revenues have come in over the course of time from $674,000 5 years ago to $1.8 million sustained even during COVID. So that's, shout out to them. Grant contributions, a lot of collaboration with the IPS Education Foundation. We talk about the Education Equity Fund and the many things that they do for our schools. It's great to have Stephanie Bailey and that team collaborating more than ever before to connect donors and students and share the needs of the district. And so we see great strides there and sustained increase in grant contributions that we rely on. And then also the rental income arrangements with certain schools, and then also some sales have dropped the rental income and have not been as much of a focus this year. And then highlighted before the $5 million in sales of proceeds. All told, $15 million of revenue, not from the state, not from the feds, through the work in the systems, tying some of the revenue and the work that we do. So I want to kudos to Scott and the team, to the academic team, and the systems and processes they've put in place and sustained. This slide highlights some of the work that we did in 1920. There's a lot of work that was done pre and post-COVID, and we highlighted this in our April quarterly finance update. But in the post-COVID, now looking back in almost September, to know that the COVID, the impact on the economy was historic, quick, and severe, and it continues to be, and it potentially could be for months, years to come. And what we want to highlight is that it's almost a tale of two cities or tale of 2 years, where we had a year of the time of strategy and then a time of stabilization. And those stabilization moments met the needs of IPS students, IPS families, and the greater Indianapolis community. But when we look at 2021, the school year we're in right now, we highlighted in the general obligation bond public hearing our shift to one-to-one technology. That was a distinct, strategic, adaptable, optimizing decision that we had to do for our students. We've implemented social distancing protocols. So when we do come back to buildings, and we intend to, and people are in our buildings today, that we do that in a safe, healthy environment, and we have return to work guidelines. And we also did work, launching the virtual learning online program. Those all three happen over the course of the summer, addressing the needs of our students. But amidst those decisions and investments that we made in the realm of $27 million, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of outstanding questions about funding. Some at the federal level, some at the state level, some at the local level. To Commissioner Moore's point, appreciate the philanthropy out there, really appreciate that. Can't do it without it. And also the general obligation bonds that I think we're on the path to do, but we have to think about it strategically, and what's the tax rate and how much is going to cost, and is this the right time to do it? At the federal funding level, we've highlighted the CARES Act. A lot of conversation about the CARES Act. Where's the money? What's it's being spent on? Well, the status is that since we talked last, there's more questions. There's more questions about the use of it, how much we're going to get, how much we actually have available. Most of it is driven around what the calculation is and the formula is for how much we will pass to the non-public schools. There are IPS students at non-pub schools. Our IPS supports them. But right now, we have a $2 million amount that has been allocated to the non-pubs. Depending upon if the Indiana Department of Ed or the U.S. Department of Ed wins the court case or the legal proceedings that are going through the courts right now, it may be up to another $3 million, a total of $5 million of that $16.5 million from IPS may end up being distributed to the non-pub. So at this time, I believe there's about $11 million available to be spent on the needs of IPS LEA kids, and there's $3 million that we've reserved pretty much to make sure that, okay, we can't spend this because this is not necessarily, it's not potentially ours. Okay, so that's one of the remaining outstanding items with the CARES Act. And we'll continue on. This will probably go into the October, November timeframe, the outstanding item on that. When it comes to the governor's fund, great opportunity, $61 million. The pie is the pie. Everybody, from every district going for some of that money. IPS, our grant was denied, but we also were a part of the Marion County e-learning fund. We're excited to learn what that award amount will be. We know Fort Wayne received about $2 million or so. So that may be just a ballpark that we can plan around, but again, we have not been determined, we have not been awarded an amount from that fund. So over the course of the conversation tonight, we've talked about $27 million of investment that we've done already. And most of the cash flow is happening in July and August. Today we actually paid a $5 million bill to Apple. And that's a lot of the cash flow is starting to happen. So when we come back for the Q1 in October, there's going to be a lot of cash flow you're going to see out. But who's going to pay for it? Right now, it's being paid by operations fund, education fund. But over the course of the next 2 years, we anticipate with reimbursements from CARES Act, GeoBond, philanthropy, FEMA, that those dollars will be made up, but potentially still a gap. In this slide that follows is a quote from our superintendent on August 7th in her op-ed, where she says, "We face greater costs as we take on twin challenges of ensuring all can participate in distance learning while preparing for physical reopening." And this has become a political moment for our state. We've invested $27 million at a time of a pandemic, and the state is having questions about whether they're going to fund that or not. $27 million estimated to be about $4 million refunded by FEMA. Again, hope. We'll hope they're eligible expenditures. Right now, the FEMA is set up to deal with hurricanes and earthquakes. It's not set up to deal with health pandemics. And so there's a lot of questions. There's not an expert in the U.S. on FEMA applications for the pandemic, but we're all going to go through it, and we're hoping for the best. We anticipate $4 million being reimbursed to us over the course of the next 2 years at some point of the $27 million we've already spent. Again, $5 million we've gone with the GeoBond. That's $9 million total, and then $11 million from CARES at this time. So 27 minus 20, there's about a $7 million gap to be filled, hopefully with some additional dollars, either through philanthropy or additional other resources, grants that may come in our way. So we've talked about some of the investments, but let's look at the long term. The impact of real estate property taxes is a significant portion of our finance. It's funding our operating referendum, it's funding our operations fund. You have to remember that the impact of this economic activity is probably going to have a 2-year lag, and then at that time, if the economy comes back, it's going to be even lagging on the uptick. And this is a slide that reminds us that in 08-010 recession, there was that downturn, and then the economy picking up in 2010, 2009 didn't really start hitting the books for IPS and school districts around our state until about 2012, 2013. We have to also address some of Commissioner O'Connor's questions that he's had in the past. It's like, at some point, the downtown area, we have significant hotel and convention situation where the Indy 500 is run without fans. We've got Final Four, we've got All-Star Game, we've got you name it. It's not going to happen. And there's a lot of jobs that have gone away from the downtown area and have sustained being away for the last 4 or 5 months. Seems like years. But we have significant employers as well not coming to the downtown area as well every day. Salesforce, in an article yesterday, not coming back into the tower until August 2021. Potentially, many Lilly employees that I've connected with, they're working at home the rest of the year. Who's eating? Who's staying downtown Indianapolis? Those are concerns that I have and that we need to be monitoring as a district, because I think we just need to be monitoring it. It's a concern of mine. Next slide is talking about virtual funding. This is state funding. So legislation currently shows 85% of the foundation amount goes to schools if you have kids 50% or more of the time in a virtual setting. So this legislation, the intent was to address a 100% intentional online school, but it's using to guide statewide funding conversations for school districts during a pandemic. It's a state that trumpets local decision-making, and there are different mandates in each of these locales. So in June 2020, the governor, the House, the Senate, the leaders, the governor said, we've been spared the knife. And the Senate said we support a 1-year waiver to fully fund all students enrolled in public school districts, and the House basically concurred. Our superintendent on that same day in similar articles said, Indianapolis Public Schools is very pleased the state has decided to hold to its commitment to move forward with its planned budget for K-12 education in the new fiscal year and not make funding cuts at such a critical time. This announcement and certainty in funding will be instrumental as we plan for new health and safety protocols due to COVID-19. And then leaders in the Senate came back with a letter in August, early August, saying, quote, yes, there is a strong appetite for making the change needed to give 100%. However, quote, no guarantee such an exception will be made for schools that don't give families the option of in-person instruction in a school building, end quote. So the letter has caused me and many others, business officials around the state, to have a lot of uncertainty on how the General Assembly will ensure K-12 districts are, quote, spared the knife. We're a state that promotes local decision-making, then reduces funding if local decisions are not in accordance with how the state wishes for all the local districts to operate. Since these moments in early August of uncertainty and cause, we've had conversations with legislators where we've advocated with them and shared our local decision-making process, our rationale, and our online curricular programming plan. There's a greater understanding, and we're hopeful that ongoing conversations will lead to progress in 100% funding. Yet action is still needed by the General Assembly and Governor, and we will wait for a decision along with every urban, suburban, and rural district in our state. No one is immune from this concern. To give you some examples, if IPS returns in October, like we planned and like we said we would, and there is a large percentage of students who are in person for the duration of the school year, then there's potential those students would be less than 50% virtual, and we would receive 100% funding, if all goes as planned. But if IPS returns in October and there's a large percentage of students who are in person for a time, but then COVID returns and requires significant action in the December or January timeframe before 50% of the year is over, and all students go virtual for the remainder of the school year, all students may be unable to attain greater than 50% in person because of a local or statewide mandate. IPS, nor Marion County, nor the state totally controls what will happen for the duration of the school year. And at some point, even a popular hybrid model splitting days 50% of the time in and out of the building is at risk of falling under the 50% threshold in the case where a school or entire district is shut down for a time. I really liked what the Pike superintendent said. She said, we will all suffer if there is even the perception that schools are being forced to make decisions that prioritize the funding they need to operate in the safest manner possible, whatever that may be, over the health and well-being of their students. IPS has no intention to not serve students in buildings where we believe they are best served and that they will thrive. And IPS encourages state leaders to swiftly develop a plan of action to solidify the funding for school year 2020-21 for all public schools at the originally planned funding levels to support the investments required to take on the twin challenges of ensuring all can participate in distance learning while preparing for physical reopening. Returning to the slide, $855 equals $33 million, 33,000 kids at $855 a drop is $28 million of revenue. That's what this slide shows. So in addition to $27 million of investment in preparation to return to school, we're looking at an additional $28 million drop, a total of $55 million hit on our bottom line for one school year. And what does that look like with just the revenue in considerations? So when we look long term, the hit moves the cash balance being run out at an earlier time. If the blue line is where we project to be and people keep their commitment in June that we're fully funded, that's what the blue line stands for. If we have 35%, just picking a number, projecting 35% kids virtual, if they do not change the legislation, the orange line is what is represented by 35% of the kids being virtual, 65% being in person. And then the green line is if somehow every kid is deemed a virtual kid and funding is dropped by that $28 million. It's often said that budgets are a measure of our values. In Indianapolis, we value our children, even especially in a hard time. We have to invest in their well-being, and we've done that. IPS is being asked to do so much more. We cannot do it with less. So if less does come, we would need to come back to this slide where we've talked about decision points. We need to be reminded of the work that we've been working on for a couple of years on driving those costs down where they need to be driven down and investing where we need to invest. So over the course of the next few months, team members, Team IPS, will be engaged with the community, will be engaged with the board, giving recommendations on strategic conversations, specifically in the development, the facilities, and the ongoing transportation needs of our kids. Key messages trying to drive home tonight. That COVID-19 has impacted the global and local economy, and IPS has been hit. We stabilized in the later part of last school year, serving both our students and our greater community. We've adopted and optimized academic programming in our operations for this school year to serve students in a safe and rigorous online environment. And then IPS strives and advocates for a sustainable long-term financial plan to support our academic program priorities. At this time, I'm open for questions.
Mr. Arnold.
I probably should know this, but on slide 19, give me an example of non-innovation and IPS LEA. I get the innovation LEA would be like Edison. That's an innovation school that's in our LEA. And innovation non-LEA would be like Matchbook Learning. But what's non-innovation, the top two?
That would be like George Buck.
Who?
George Buck, for example.
Just
That would be
our traditional schools.
non-innovation.
Yeah, just
Our
our
traditional
traditional
schools.
schools.
And then what's IPS LEA?
So there are IPS schools that are innovation and not innovation that are in the same LEA. So that would include Edison, Thomas Gregg, Cold Spring, Super School, Thrival, Manual High School.
But aren't those, I guess I'm not understanding the
Or
difference.
I believe Orange, IPS LEA is inclusive, Weston, is that correct, of the gray, which is Innovation LEA? We
Correct.
sort of just pulled
Correct.
out that group of
Okay,
schools.
so they're not mutually exclusive.
Correct.
No, this is
Okay,
not
that's
a
what I
add this
think
plus
it's
this
in
plus
those
this.
categories. Okay, so they're not mutually, they can be in more than
Correct.
one category.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for the confusion.
Wasn't in a funnel, I didn't get it.
Mr. Hawkins.
Well, Weston, let me first start, because there's a whole lot going on there in that presentation. But first and foremost, just want to thank you again, and Superintendent and your team as well, for weathering this season from March 12th or 13th all the way through, because there was a whole lot of activity, families being served food, and technology being moved here and there. And so I know that there was a lot of activity, so I appreciate you and the team just managing the resources as responsibly as possible, and that shows. And it's always positive to end with $21 million in cash. That's good. That's good. I think the other question I have before I get to my maybe a question statement is, do we know when the state will, I don't know, issue their most updated revenue projections for the next budget cycle?
My understanding is that the budget office is doing one at the end of September.
And will
They
that?
usually do it in December, but
Okay.
there's one that they're planning on doing in September. That's my understanding.
Okay.
For your specific question, for the budget cycle, there's usually a February, so it'd be February 2021 report that really drives the budget decision-making
For the upcoming biennium
for the
budget.
upcoming,
system.
yeah, for the
Okay.
upcoming biennium.
And do we have enough information then from February then moving, or is this really what September is the touch-up? I guess what I'm trying to get at is when will the state begin to project what they assume to be the case on the revenue side, right? Because I'm just assuming that the pie is going to be smaller, and I'm just curious as to when will we know?
I believe, again, against IASBO and some of the other business officials, my understanding is that there's some analysis being done in late September by the state budget office to give direction on what the legislative committees and the decisions in 2021 may be looking at as far as dollars available. But I may be totally wrong on understanding the legislative process.
Okay. That's helpful, just
I mean,
curious.
Right now, I think we're probably looking at, break even, a no change on the dollar per pupil, or conservatively, if I come back in the budget appropriation time of January, February, March next year, a 5% decrease might be a good conservative estimate on the downside. I can't see it going up, because you can't distribute what you don't have.
Right.
I think that's something that we're all gonna have to wrestle with.
So I think I guess where I'm going with this is I appreciate the superintendent and the team's advocacy for and supporting our kids, particularly when we talk about this 85% funding dynamic. And so I often encounter parents, and I guess I'm speaking directly to parents, either in the room or in streaming in, but parents often ask how they can be supportive and they can help. And, there's certainly the district has, put our flag in the ground when we talk about equity and what's right. And we think about a situation where we're in a pandemic of no one's making, but frankly, we are doing the best that we can do for our kids to make sure they have the resources they need, and to know that there's a conversation out there that funding will be 85%, for when professionals, when health experts have advised, a district and school systems to make this pivot is very concerning. And I just want to acknowledge that I think as we go into this next legislative session, I think for our families in particular, the card has been played or shown, and I think we just need to be very cautious and considerate of the fact that we need parent voice in this next session to ensure that even if the pie is what the pie is, that as we think about what students who are at the most, sort of at risk and highest need, that those dollars are preserved in some form or fashion. So I don't know if it's a percentage-based cut or a dollar per cut, whatever it is, but that ensures that kids that are at the highest risk receive the resources that they need. And I'm just very concerned about that. And so again, I say to parents that have asked what can they do and have, expressed their voice and want to help, this is an opportunity to say that we have the opportunity to witness, a circumstance where our kids could be underfunded or not receive the resources that they need in the classroom during a pandemic that they need. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that for the record and on the record, just to say that I'm very concerned about that. And that's something that to me, all I can do is scratch my head and just acknowledge it's not right. So I appreciate everything you're doing and the team's doing on behalf of our children, and ensuring that the resources are where they need to be, which is in their hands so they can learn.
I would address the one issue with regards to 85% funding. The politics of virtual versus hybrid versus in-class learning notwithstanding, the legislature will convene in November for an organization. They have the opportunity, should they choose, to address that at that point in time. In a typical, whatever typical is these days, budget cycle, the February, which is sort of the last quarter of the year prior, state report is usually the guidance they use in crafting the state budget. I don't know, they have talked about it, the legislature not even convening the session until March potentially this year. So a lot of things are at play, but certainly with regards to the 85% funding, if they choose to sort of recognize we're in a pandemic and school systems are doing, with the guidance of health department officials and others, what's in the best interest of families, they have the opportunity to fix that in November.
Well, that's good to hear. And again, I also want to acknowledge that there have been policymakers, including our governor, that has, affirmed or confirmed his support for full funding. And I think we all appreciate that message as well. So thanks for clarifying that.
Any further questions? Commissioner Collins.
I just want to say thank you for the insight on the November, because this 85% funding was very distressing to me, and I want to thank you, Weston, and all your team, and Alicia, for doing for parsing out all of this information. It's a lot to take in, but the fact remains is that there's going to be a huge shortfall, and so anything we can do to push for full funding and for looking at more closely of where we can adjust our spendings, then I'm all for 100%.
Any questions from our commissioners on the phone this evening?
Yes, I have one, I have two. Thank you, Weston, as usual, and thank you always for your graphics. I would like to go to slide 18, the COVID response and virtual funding. And I just wanted you to explain to me just a little bit about that graph. I see the 855, I guess that's $1 million arrow coming down. Explain what that means to the virtual funding for people.
Yes, Commissioner Gore, what I'm trying to convey is I've typically shown the slide of what the dollar per pupil is, and we've shown this for a number of years. I tried to overlay and tried to give a picture of what we're talking about when they're going to drop the funding for a virtual student. It's $855, and the way they calculate that is the $5,703, so over in the right-hand side of that graph, that page, 100% of the foundation is $5,703. 85% of $5,703 is that $4,847. The difference is $855. If you take $855 and multiply that by the number of students we project to have, or what we will actually have, our projection is 33,000 kids. You multiply that by $855, it's about $28 million that we're talking is the impact to IPS associated students.
Okay. So what we're basically saying is that we will have enough to take care of our children during this budget year per student. Am I correct?
On this chart,
Foundation funding.
on this chart, I'm not saying we'll have enough, but on the other pages where I'm talking about the balances, where we talk about education having 1 month of reserves, or the operations fund having 6 months of reserves, I believe the answer is yes. I think we'll have enough to get through this year.
Okay. I mean, that's important, really, when we're looking at COVID and not knowing what the outcome may be eventually for our children.
And I think that's an important point, Commissioner
also,
Gore.
I was looking at slide 7 when we were talking about the minority. I saw that And I always appreciate the fact that we are using minority businesses, and I see that that has stayed pretty much the same. But I saw that we lost minority women and our veterans. We lost several of the other minority businesses that we usually have in our grant. Can you explain a little bit to me about that?
Yes. Last year, there were some vendors that did work that are not doing work this year. It's not that we didn't want them, it's the work is done, and they were the ones that were doing it. There's also a lot of spend with minority vendors related to the capital referendum work. And during the March through June timeframe, there was a little bit of a delay in getting in buildings, and there wasn't as much happening in the facilities. So I think we're going to see a pickup. It might be a timing difference. I think we'll see a pickup of those cash outlays actually going out in July and August. I know, for example, Powers Davis, who's doing an incredible job in doing the work for a lot of our capital referendum needs. We've written a lot of checks in July and don't show up in records that go only through June. So it's late August. I think we're seeing people more back into some of the, we'll say, normal operational summer work that's going on. But I also want to highlight some of the work is different this year than last. And when we have work shifts and change, that also impacts the spend.
Okay. And this is just one question, and it may be a little offline or may not be. I was looking at slide 4 as well, and we were talking about referendum dollars. And at some point, there is no effect of COVID on our referendum funds. Am I correct? Because those dollars are all allocated for different areas as we ask our taxpayers for. So the COVID has no direct effect on referendum dollars. Am I correct?
I would say in the short term, we will see roughly $30 to $31 million a year from our operating referendum proceeds. That could be something that we can expect. I think if I look and point you to slide 17, what I was trying to make a point there is that when we look at the assessed value that is driving the operating referendum proceeds, it may not grow at the same rate as it has in the past because of the recession and some of the valuations of properties in the TIF, in the tax increment finance districts that are primarily downtown. I could see an impact of COVID on our property tax valuations, our property valuations, and then in the longer term, the 4 to 5 year time frame, I could see our operating referendum dollars decreasing because they're not increasing or growing at the same rate, or in fact, potentially decreasing. That's just a fact and a reality that we have to acknowledge.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, Weston. This is Commissioner Swat. I did have, I guess maybe it's just a statement. I guess I just wanted to know a little bit more about the slide 16. And I know it states down there at the bottom that we're going to have to continue to keep funding all of our years up front and just try to seek the reimbursement later. So I guess this is in regards to what Commissioner Hawkins has said, that we're basically not going to be funded this money back right now. So we're just looking to be reimbursed. So what if we don't get reimbursed for this money? Do we have funds to carry this, what you're saying?
If I understand your question, if we don't get reimbursed at all from FEMA or CARES or get enough philanthropy, who pays for it? I look back to the Education Operations Fund slides where we talk about our cash balances, are they sufficient? I look at the operations fund. Again, we have 6 months in reserves, and I think we can weather the storm for a year or two with the reserves we have. But I think it points to some of the decisions that we have on slide 22, where we have to manage our cash and we have to manage our operations. And there might be some facilities conversations that we don't want to have. There might be some transportation conversations. There might be some central office conversations. There might even be school operations conversations. We've gone through that before a couple years ago when we had to do some of the budget cuts because of the deferral of the referendum. So we will hopefully have reimbursements, and the federal government can print money. It amazingly does that time and time again. So FEMA and CARES are available. They're allocated, available to us. We're pursuing it. There may be more coming, but I can't cash the check yet.
Thank you, Weston. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Weston? Weston, thank you for your usual in-detailed presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Weston. Item 7.03 is an update on our racial equity work and priority. Again, this is another area where our work has continued, even within the context of COVID-19. And so I will turn it over to Dr. Payne, Sean Harris, and Andrew Strope for this presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson, and good evening, Board. So we are going to have just a brief conversation to provide the Board of School Commissioners an update on the commitments that we made in the Board Policy 1619 and the associated Black Lives Matter resolution that was adopted this past June, specifically the diversity, equity, and inclusion audit and the next steps with Promise 54, which was something that we highlighted in June, and that work is getting ready to kick off, and so I want to make sure that, that you all know about it.
Very much. I'll now start over again. Commissioner and Superintendent Johnson, good evening. As always, it is an honor to sit here before you. I commend you, of course, for all of your outstanding work that we believe will enable this school district to transform this dead fish narrative. That is our goal. Because of your fearless action, we are finally beginning to create an IPS community where student outcomes can no longer be able to be predicted by race or ethnicity. That is our goal. You cannot probably see this from where you're sitting, but it's blue water, beautiful blue water that replaces that yucky lake that we're seeing now, and the fish are jumping up out of the water. They're vibrant. That's going to be the analogy that we're looking for, where expectations are high for all of our students, where there are no longer negative assumptions or stereotypes, where families and students can't wait to come to the schools. That is what we're looking for, and because of the actions that you have taken, we are getting closer and closer and closer to replacing this slide. Thank you.
Great, and so just alignment to the 2025 strategic plan, which we will bring to you a little bit later this evening. I think Commissioner Hawkins said it perfectly this evening that we as an organization have put a stake in the ground or flag in the ground around equity, and so we've got value that speaks to racial equity. It is a strategic priority as we move forward, and then also highlighting the initiative for this school year that articulates the passage of that racial equity board policy, and then a lot of additional work that will come right behind that, this diversity, equity, inclusion audit being one of those. So just a quick reminder of this board policy that was passed in June. The purpose of that was really a declaration of where we stand as an organization, an acknowledgement of our past, and then a commitment to the future. And that policy is divided into 6 sections there that you can see on the screen. And so I wanted to lift this up as, we also made some commitments in there, and this is obviously a summary of those commitments, but a lot of this work had already been going on, as we know, before this board policy. But the strengthening and expanding of our racial equity work to eliminate opportunity gaps and build the capacity of team members to persistently identify and address individual bias, as well as disrupt institutionally racist structures and policies within the district. We've had the racial equity trainings that have been going on for 4 or 5 years in this organization that we have been ramping up. And then we believe that this diversity, equity, and inclusion audit and the work that will come after that speaks directly to the commitments that we made as an organization in that policy. And then the associated Black Lives Matter resolution spoke directly to this work in collaboration with Promise 54 to help us identify some gaps and develop those strategies for making progress towards racial equity as an organization. So now I'll turn it over to Sean to talk a little bit more about this specific work.
Good evening, Board and Superintendent Johnson. It's great to see you again. So we mentioned the Promise 54 partnership in the past. Just wanted to give you a little bit more insight on who they are as an organization. So their mission is to help adults thrive so that they can do their best work for students. And they were inspired by the Brown v. Board Supreme Court ruling in 1954, believing that in that ruling was a promise that every student deserved equitable access to educational opportunity. And Promise 54 enables organizations to deliver on this commitment. One of the services that they provide are diversity, equity, and inclusion audits, which is the service they'll be providing for us. And then the previous graphic is just a wide range of organizations that they've worked with, ranging from San Francisco Public Schools to the National Civil Rights Museum located in my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. So the purpose of having this audit conducted is to see how we fall in terms of our policies and practices as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And based on the findings of the audit, they will make recommendations on shifts we can make to become a more equitable organization. And the findings of this audit could help define our milestones and initiatives for our racial equity work for the next 5 years. So in terms of scope, we actually had our kickoff call with Promise 54 yesterday. It went really well. We are super excited to be working with this organization. The first aspect of this partnership is going to consist of 2 surveys. The first survey being a organizational profile survey, just so that they can get a baseline understanding of the IPS landscape. So they'll be collecting demographic data, policies, and practices that are aligned to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the second survey will be a staff experience survey where they'll be gauging staff perspectives on the effectiveness of our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And both of these surveys will be launching next week. So in terms of deliverables, once we receive those additional or initial findings from the audit, Promise 54 is going to help us facilitate some focus groups with IPS stakeholders, and combined with that data and the responses we get from those focus groups, they'll make some recommendations for our diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. In terms of who's going to be able to see the responses from these surveys, they're going to be completely anonymous. Only Promise 54 will have access to the disaggregated data to protect the anonymity of our respondents. So as mentioned before, the survey is actually going to be launching on this upcoming Monday, and we'll be leaving the survey window open until September 11th, and it will be sent to all IPS staff members.
Back on again. This is a movement, not a moment. Commissioners, you have, with the extraordinary leadership of Board President Commissioner Michael O'Connor and Superintendent Alicia Johnson, continued our journey which started with a moment. I'm sorry. It started not with the moment. It started in 1979, to tell you the truth, with a board resolution that said Black history would be taught in grades kindergarten through 12 and infused throughout the entire curriculum. But now, this has been transformed into a full-blown movement. And Commissioner O'Connor, let me just say that I read the article this morning in the paper, and I want to thank you for your kind remarks, but thank you even more for your courageous leadership, which will be missed. Now, I just want to share a few of the racial equity actions that have been achieved to date, in addition to what you've already heard, that we're on this continuous journey, a journey really that never ends, but leading more even toward this movement that we are engaged in. We're still having monthly conversations at principals' meetings, which is something we've never done before. We are still involved in book studies with the executive leadership team, which is the Superintendent's leadership team. We have been involved in reading this book, Polite Protest. If you have not read it, I would certainly recommend it to you. It gives an entire history of racism in Indianapolis and includes IPS in that history. We intend to have our third Racial Equity Summit in 2021. We have continued with new teacher training, going through the racial equity training. We have designed and executed those community conversations that the board was having that really centered a lot on the racial equity movement. Those I'm sure will pick up. We did one in November 4th, 5th, 6th, 13th, and 14th, and we were just getting ready to start some more when dear old COVID hit. We have redesigned our district equity team and school equity team structure. We are doing massive training, racial equity training now, and we are training the entire district. So we have moved beyond the 29 equity schools to the entire district. We have launched affinity groups, which will be planning, discussing, debating, and drafting recommendations. And then, of course, the highlight of everything is the Racial Equity Policy 1619 and the Black Lives Matter resolution. So again, I want to thank you so much for your leadership, and we continue on this journey to move from a movement that is no longer a moment. Thank you.
If I might, while we are celebrating the movement, I think we have a moment to celebrate that movement that we tried to do, I think, in June. Dr. Payne, if you would join the superintendent, I think we have a plaque commemorating the work we've done. If you could join us at the front.
So we were planning to present this when we passed the policy, but you weren't here in person and we didn't want to do it outside of this space. But to honor you for your leadership in getting us from moments to movements since 1979, we want to present you with a framed plaque of the policy and the resolution. And Dr. Payne, we do have a copy for Anne Marie Byers. I want to publicly recognize her as well for all of, as your partner in crime and in conviction and equity. So we have one for her as well. All right, well, I will keep us moving forward in the agenda. There are no items in unfinished business, and so we will move directly into new business. The first item, item 9.0, 1 is an update on the Student Code of Conduct for the board's review and approval. You'll remember that we annually present updates that have been made to the Student Code of Conduct, and so this is that annual update, and I'd invite Courtney Flukas and Brian Dinkins to provide commissioners with this update. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Good evening. I would like to introduce Brian Dinkins, who is our Culture and Climate Coordinator. And so our team, Unified Student Support, works on an annual basis with a review committee to facilitate the review process of the Code of Conduct, and to really strengthen what Dr. Payne and team have just emphasized. We want to be sure that this document is not just a document, but really embodies the systems that help us meet the commitment that we said we want to meet. And so today, we will look at the purpose of that annual review process. We will also discuss the guiding goals of the process, review the reflection from those who participated in the annual review, as well as how we have recommended to update the document and ensure equitable application. So the purpose of the annual review process is to ensure that we are regularly taking a reflection or a step back and reviewing the guidance that we have put out for students and staff, how our administrators will respond to student behavior, how we will conduct ourselves as citizens in our buildings. We also want this document to ensure that there is language about promoting prevention and positive climate and culture. It should not just be about corrective action, but how we are instilling positivity in relationship as well as in our systems and practices. In terms of the equitable practices that we are promoting through the review process, we are supporting the teaching and learning in the wake of COVID-19. So we know that in looking at the document this year, we would have to have some updates that were reflective of our current state. We also needed to be sure that we were increasing the consistency of tiered supports. So our schools need to be supported in how they apply the Code of Conduct. And so that was one of the main focus areas for our team. We also looked at the systems of graduated corrective responses. So as we all would hope, the removal or exclusionary practices should not be based on knee-jerk reactions and should not be our first response to many and most behavioral infractions. So what does that system look like, and how is it a graduated system? And finally, we always want to determine if there are ways that we can reduce exclusionary practices. In terms of increasing our student outcomes, we know that we need to have students in seats and engaged in rigorous instruction, and we can't do that if they are not in the school. And so as such, there were 4 key topic areas that consistently came up amongst the various groups that participated and that were lasting trends throughout that process. The first 3, the equitable administrative response, PPE, and technology acceptable use, will have more in-depth guidance regarding. The plagiarism and copyright language was merely an addition to the actual document. So in terms of updates in regards to those 3 key areas, we have taken a look at discipline data and had some very high concerns about our response to pre-K and kindergarten infractions. What our team has noticed and presented to the principals was a trend of removing our very little babies very early with around just under 100 suspensions of kindergarten students. That was an alarming number to us, particularly because that number was higher than the number of senior suspensions. So we wanted to be sure that we lifted that trend to our principals who were participating and to the teachers and other staff who were participating in the review process, because sometimes you are looking at your local data where you may have 1 or 2 of those suspensions rather than looking at the full scope of exclusionary data for the district. And so we wanted to be sure that they were aware. On the next slide, I'll discuss what recommendations we have in response to that, but wanted to be sure that you were aware of that data point. Additionally, we have been answering various media requests about seclusion and restraint. In particular, those seclusion and restraint incidents that involve school resource officers. And so we wanted to be sure that we were consistent in how we were reporting the seclusion and restraint data, and ensure that principals were aware of our obligation and the difference between a seclusion or restraint that involved an educator versus one that was facilitated by a police officer. The second update is around PPE for student and staff. So obviously we want, in the time of COVID, to ensure that we are promoting safe and healthy school environments. So the Human Resources Department and our Health Services team worked with Marion County Public Health Department to ensure we put together some guidance for returning safely to schools. And one piece of that safety guidance is related to students and staff wearing masks. And so principals and teachers had concerns about how are we going to respond if students are unable or unwilling to wear masks. And so we've given some guidance there, but did want to be sure that exclusionary practices were not utilized in those cases. The third major topic is related to technology use. As we have moved to a one-to-one remote learning setting, we wanted to be sure that our code of conduct encompassed language about how students and families could be using the technology responsibly and would be accessing the IPS network in a responsible manner, and have included and recommended language regarding that. And again, the plagiarism and copyright language was absent from the code of conduct, and so we have recommended to add that language. So to dive a tad bit deeper into the key areas that I just discussed, in terms of our administrative response for the suspensions for our younger students, what we are asking administrators is to receive guidance and support from an executive director of schools, so from their EDS supervisor, prior to any exclusion consequence for a pre-K or kindergarten student. So we would like for them to ensure that they have done some problem solving, that they have sought support for the particular matter that has come up. If egregious enough and the EDS is also in agreement, then we believe that it could potentially be an offense that's warranting that particular infraction. But what you will notice in the code of conduct is that there are very few infractions that are deemed tier 3 or tier 4 that a pre-K or kindergarten student would be eligible in receiving a harsh consequence like suspension. Additionally, we have developed some training opportunities to ensure that in terms of seclusion and restraint reporting, that we are differentiating for administrators, again, those incidents that are eligible to be reported on behalf of IPS, and then making it very clear that when a school resource officer or police officer is engaging in any kind of physical touch or responding to a particular scene, that then is not an opportunity for us to report, but for our school police to report. And so we have worked with Chief Gwen and her team to ensure that we are in sync in that particular regard. Additionally, I mentioned the masks and PPE that we are requiring and asking students and staff to utilize on a daily basis. The addition, or diving a little bit deeper there, we would make note that for the students or staff who are unable to wear a mask for health reasons or similar, we did follow the CDC guidance and what we have put in our health and safety guidance document, so that the schools would have something to work from in terms of talking points, understanding how those students may be impacted or those staff may be impacted if they did have to wear those masks, and then have provided some additional types of PPE, particularly for our special education students who may have otherwise been affected negatively by wearing a mask. And finally, we have recommended an acceptable use agreement to respond to the technology that students have access to. We want to be sure, again, that they are responsibly utilizing the district-owned technology, the resources associated with that technology, as well as the IPS network. and have clarified what those expectations are via the acceptable use guidance. That is a summary of the recommendations from the team and an overview of that process, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Arnold?
Just a comment on the expulsion of pre-K and kindergarten. I've been here for a while, and I remember a time where, because Indiana state law said children didn't have to be in school till they were 7 and going into first grade, that teachers would just expel children that they thought had behavior problems and say, well, they're just immature, they need to go home and come back. So I'm glad to see we're really addressing that.
Thank you for that. And yes, and we were referring to suspensions. We don't have a high rate of expulsions for pre-K or kindergarten. But I will also note that the Unified Student Supports Team is also intending to continue to support principals and schools with supporting our littles and how they can get acclimated to the school environment, ways that we can be proactive in ensuring that they are eligible to stay in the classroom and get used to that school environment. So they are not in it alone in addressing those matters.
I just think it's so important because, you know, that's when they're setting their foundation. Children, especially who come from environments that don't have access to a lot of educational support at home. So I'm glad to see you really focusing on that age. And, you know, it's surprising, it sounds shocking that we would suspend more pre-K and kindergarten children than high school seniors.
Yes.
So I'm very pleased that you're looking at that and making that a priority.
Thank you very much. And I do want to clarify that data point just to be sure we're comparing apples to apples, that we do have nearly twice the number of kindergartners as we do 12th grade students. So it's, you know, it's not necessarily an accurate reflection when we just look at the number of students who were suspended, but we still found that rate to be alarming.
Commissioner Moore?
My voice is deep enough. Thank you for the information. And I agree that, you know, we probably wouldn't be comparing apples. We would be comparing apples to apples. However, you would never expect a young child to be suspended from school based on that, because then what are you saying to them as they begin to understand their journey through school?
Absolutely.
So I guess my other question is, in a nice way, what are the demographics of those students being suspended?
By and large, African-American males.
Males?
Yes. I will
Thank
also add that Unified Student Supports, in collaboration with Peace Learning Center, will be facilitating restorative practices training for all administrators this year. And so we believe that the implementation of that training will support in their relationship building and their ability to respond to infractions appropriately.
And so I would assume that we try to group the reason for the suspensions together so we can develop practices and things to do to try and be friendlier about working the children around doing something different. So I would assume that's part of what you guys are doing. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And our culture and climate team, led by Mr. Brian Dinkins, who's here today, really take a look at that data on a monthly basis so that can inform the ways that we support schools. So we're looking at what kinds of students are being removed, at what rate, and for what types of infractions, during what part of the school day, et cetera. And so we know that schools often, again, only have like that single snapshot of their own building, but we're able to then lift those buildings that do a phenomenal job at building positive relationships and keeping students in the classroom. So we leverage those strengths to help our schools that aren't quite there yet.
Thank you. That's a good idea, too. Okay, one more question.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm trying to be politically correct as possible here. Can you tell me, of our kindergarten teachers, are they majority white female teachers?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So we also were working on developing plans, right, on how to recruit more teachers, maybe from HBCUs, other places like that. So that's part of some of the stuff that you guys are looking at also?
So our team is not necessarily recruiting staff. I believe that our human resources
Yes, I know that's
department.
what they do, but I'm saying, are
Yes,
you guys kind of
but-
working together, trying to develop a plan to
Absolutely.
do so, to reduce this number of kindergartners
Yes.
and pre-K? We're talking 3 and 4-year-old kids.
Right, you're right. What we would like and where we are really engaging with our schools is to support the teachers who are here. So we would love to continue to see more diversity amongst the staff in our buildings and see more of a match of those instructing our students and those sitting in the seats. But for those teachers who are here, many by and large have the right mindsets and want to do well for the students and don't necessarily have all the tools, and that's where our team is coming in to support.
Okay, so before I let you walk away,
Yes.
must say, I don't want anybody walking out here saying that Vanita Moore said that teachers or at IPS are doing this or that, or that I believe that teachers that are white can't teach black kids, or black teachers can't teach white kids. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we should be able to look at what are some of the reasons why they're suspending our children in such large numbers, and then try to develop, things around that, and then match teachers with other teachers so that they can have a better understanding. Because there is definitely always going to be cultural differences, and so we recognize that. And so that's one of the major things, that's one of the biggest things that we need to step off and try to figure out how we go about it. So I don't want anyone walking away here saying I said anything other than the questions that I asked. I'm sorry. Thank you so very much for the information, though. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Flukas. Appreciate the update. Mr. Jenkins as well. Appreciate you. And I know that the technology piece and some of the PPE, maybe the technology more than anything, I know that's been updated in some of the policies. But I guess I'm curious, when we talk about some of the code of conduct matters, are these updates, are they reflected in sort of the student handbook? Or I'm trying to get an idea of sort of at what level would a parent be made aware of sort of some of these shifts?
So the actual code, and all students and families will have access to it. It'll be on the website. Schools usually get a printed copy for every student as well. The language that we have recommended is that no pre-K or kindergarten suspensions can occur without EDS consult. And also, as I mentioned, there are tiered responses for every single infraction. So you'll see the table in the center of the code of conduct, and it allows administrators to understand for what type of infraction, what kind of consequence would be eligible for that infraction. And what you would notice is that for nearly all the infractions, minus like a weapon or drugs, if for pre-K or kindergarten students, it is a level 1 or 2, which is not eligible for suspension.
I appreciate that. I think, and maybe this is, I know I got an email from my daughter's school, about the code of conduct. It wasn't necessarily, as I recall, very, there wasn't a flagging or lifting up of these adjustments, and I'm wondering if, I'm just curious how schools are communicating and reflecting on these updates to the code of conduct policy, and if that's, sort of here's the policy and you read it, sign it, send it back, or hey, how are we identifying, hey, these are some major shifts that you need to be aware of?
Yeah, so based on the board's sort of approval of these changes, then the team will finalize that and update and send that updated version out. We'll post it on our website.
And we also facilitate a session and we always put together a turnkey presentation for our administrators to utilize with teachers, and if they so choose with families on like a back to school night, that walks folks through the purpose of a code of conduct and how our code of conduct is laid out, et cetera. So we try to make it pretty easy for the administrators to communicate on it with consistency.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Any of the commissioners on the phone have a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks, President O'Connor. This is Commissioner Slack. Thank you for being here tonight. I think our school did give out something similar to this, where parents had to sign for the technology before they left, kind of going over a brief overview of how the technology would be used. Is that in general? I think I'm asking the same question as Commissioner Hawkins did. Is that kind of in general? Are we saying that we're going to be sending something out a little bit different from each school along with that?
So the schools have not received the 2021 version of the code of conduct. So anything that may have been distributed would have been a previous board-approved document.
And Commissioner Slack, just a little bit of context there. So in the weekly memo that I sent to commissioners, you might remember a few weeks back, I sent the acceptable use policy because we did want to make sure as we were getting those devices out that families were aware of that policy. So that inclusion in the memo was sort of a preview of what the Code of Conduct team was working on.
Okay, yeah, I do remember you saying that. I do remember you talking about the teachers as well as using the devices. So I guess I was more looking towards the teachers using the devices versus the students. So, okay, I am understanding now. Thank you. And I also appreciate the work that you've discovered along the way. Appreciate that work.
Thank you.
Looking at the phone anticipatingly. I'm gonna ask a question that I would anticipate Commissioner Gore would ask as we think about, you know, this as we think about suspensions and discipline, you know, we see it in our school reports that the disproportionate African American male suspensions and discipline. And I, you know, what as we're walking through institutional racism, and I take what you said, Commissioner Moore, with heart, which is we all have to learn about our cultural differences and work together. We have to address that affirmatively, and I hope as we continue to go through this, that the place for our students is in a learning environment, and that we have to recognize that not unlike the picture of the dead fish, that is a symptom of a problem with us rather than with the students. And so I hope as we think about continuing to do this, I don't hope, I know we're doing this, but I think we should address that affirmatively, that we know that's wrong and that we are going to work hard as a system and as a board and as an organization addressing this individually, that we have to take that on as our responsibility. Commissioner Gore, did I do okay with that?
Yes.
Commissioner Arnold.
On page 10 of the, I'm assuming, proposed policy, it talks about, the innovation schools aren't required to follow the same plan so I'm hoping that through our innovation agreements that we are ensuring that they have similar policies, because I know that's one of the questions we often ask about is looking at their suspensions and expulsions, color. So
We do. Jamie, do you want to speak to the process we use?
Sure, thank you. So you're right that at this time they're not required to pick up our, exact policy and use it. For the schools that are within our LEA, it's articulated within their agreements that they do have to follow our IPS expulsion process. So in the event that, a student comes up for that, they flow through the exact process that Ms. Flukas was describing that, as part of the IPS Standard 1. The charters need to have their own, but it's one that they share with us as part of their application process, and if it changes, then we're notified as that as well. And then, as you mentioned, when they come for their semi-annual reports, they're held accountable for that data, and when we see discrepancies, obviously are following up on it. Additionally, the USS team has been very generous in offering all of the trainings and resources that they've compiled to our innovation schools, so they have access to those as well. And we certainly encourage them to adopt ours and use the spirit of it so that they can be in line across our family of schools.
thank you.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
both.
I did more, Mike. I'm sorry, this is Commissioner Slack. I know that we're saying that we're encouraging them, but I just want to say, I want to say kudos to the administration for pushing forward and making sure that we're setting very headfast on saying that we want this change. And we don't only just want it, but we are going to make sure it happens. Because before we said we wanted it, and I think that I see more now that the administration is pushing forward and making sure that it does happen. So So I no longer want to hear encouraging. I want to hear that, you know, you're going to make it happen for our students, because that's what needs to happen. I agree with President O'Connor when it says that we need to say to speak when it's not right, and make sure we point it out. So I thank the administration for going forward with this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to you both.
So we do have the presentation to take action on, or the actual student code of conduct to take action on tonight. Do I have a motion to approve the student code of conduct for school year 2020-2021 as presented?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Mr. Mulholland will take the roll on this also.
Commissioner Arnold,
Yes.
Commissioner Gore,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore, Commissioner Slack,
Yes.
Secretary Collins,
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins,
Yes.
President O'Connor.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Our final presentation is an update on our 2025 strategic plan that we will ask for the board sort of approval as well. I'll turn it over to Andrew Strip.
Great, thanks Superintendent Johnson. So the objectives for this evening is to review the 2025 strategic planning process and then present to you all the values, priorities, and 2021 initiatives for adoption. And so we've had a number of conversations as a group about the strategic plan, and last had a great conversation in the July 18th board retreat. And so much of this is very similar to that. But just taking a step back as we think about strategic planning, you know, I've used this slide quite a bit as we've had these conversations, and love that quote on the right-hand side by Yogi Berra: if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. And so there are a number of elements of this strategic plan that our teams have already been executing on, and so we're excited to bring this to you all this evening to approve, hopefully, so that we can continue to align ourselves internally to do what is best for the organization. And so a few notes about process. So this talks a little bit about the context of the last few years. So in 2015, 2018, there was a strategic plan that was adopted by the board, and that sunset in 2018. So last school year, 2019-20, we had an annual plan where we adopted 6 priorities that you can see in the middle of the screen there. And then what we've set out to do with this 2025 strategic planning process is to you know, outline values, priorities, and initiatives that'll carry us for the next 5 years. And so COVID has affected both the timeline and focus of this planning work. So I think, you know, as we think about learning loss, this is something we have talked about before, but when we initially went into shutdown in the spring, we have been working with NWA, which they're an international organization that we work with to do our interim assessments, but they've been doing a lot of research on the impact of COVID on learning loss, obviously the trauma that our students, adults, you know, will be experiencing right now and continuing, and then have updated this data point since the last time we've looked at a similar slide, and that is just the economic hardship that COVID is presenting. So Weston talked a little bit about that from an Indiana and Marion County perspective, but more than 120,000 Marion County workers have filed for unemployment from March to June. And you know, kind of connecting to our conversation we just had with Dr. Payne and Sean around the importance of our racial equity work. We also know that COVID is disproportionately impacting the Black and Latinx communities in Indiana and across Marion County, both in terms of death rates and overall positive cases. So a lot of what, you know, we've taken all of this into context as we have been planning for our strategic priorities. And so our approach and our deliverables, we started in phase 1. We kicked that off last November of 2019, where we gather and analyze data to produce a pretty big organizational diagnostic that included performance analysis, surveys, interviews, focus groups. We did those town halls that you all led last fall that had some great conversation, not only about race in this city, but also where we might want to go moving forward. and then also performed instructional quality reviews and site visits. This was obviously before COVID hit, where we looked at across a number of schools and in grade configurations at what was actually happening in the classroom. And then from a phase 2 perspective, this is where we've really organized around the key components of the strategic plan. And so this is what we've had to adapt just a little bit given our context. So we have really honed in on our values, our priorities, and the 2021 implementation plan. So essentially, what are we focused on for this school year, given there is so much going on? And then what is not highlighted there is the scorecard. I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation. We have looked at a draft together as a group, but given the context that we are in, we needed to go back to the drawing board a little bit on that draft scorecard, but we'll hopefully have something to present to you this coming fall. Those 21 through 25 initiatives and milestones, so essentially what is the work over the next 4 years, that we have pushed off a little bit just so we could focus on school opening, focus on what needed to happen this current school year, and so we will kick that work back up as a team probably this coming winter. And so where you see the yellow dotted line there, that is where we are now. So we are ready to implement and progress monitor with our values, priorities, and initiatives. So in phase 1, I mentioned this a little bit, but with this diagnostic that we were able to put together integrated evidence from multiple channels. So this has some of the actual numbers in this slide. We have seen this slide before as a group, but I think this speaks to just the range of perspective that we were able to bring, even during COVID and all of the things that we've had going on. And so a lot of stakeholders, a lot of data has gone into building what is being put in front of you this evening. And then also in phase 1, I believe the board looked at this past February. We really dove into this organizational diagnostic and built this heat map, which kind of articulates where was evidence more positive than negative, that's the green, and evidence more negative than positive, and that is the red. I know this is kind of hard to see on the screen, but as you can see, just some trends there, a lot of really positive evidence around the racial equity work, around teacher attitudes and a growth mindset, staff retention, and et cetera, and then needing to do quite a bit of work on, in particular, the curriculum instruction and achievement, and that's where a lot of initiatives that we've already taken as a team and as a board, we've been able to push forward on that. For example, adopting ELA curriculum that this board adopted, I think, this past March, that is being rolled out as we speak and as part of the strategic plan. So that directly identifies with some of what you see in the red there. So then from a phase 2 perspective, as I mentioned, we have honed in on the priorities, initiative, and values. So those priorities are those multi-year focus areas that respond to the strengths and opportunities. So we see those as living over the next 5 years. And we have done a lot of work to narrow those and be really, really focused as an organization on what we need to do moving forward. The initiatives that are the work streams within the values. And so again, those are just presented as 2021 initiatives right now, just because this year has been, or this current school year, there is so much going on. And then from a values perspective, those deeply ingrained principles that guide our organization's actions and serve as the cultural cornerstones. And one of the reasons we're really excited to bring you those tonight is we've gotten so much tremendous feedback on those values, and we want to start pushing those out both internally and externally so that we can articulate how we're making decisions, because they should always align, those decision-making process should always align to those values. So we've benefited from the engagement of multiple constituent groups throughout the drafting of this plan, so this articulates just who some of those groups have been. But our most recent conversation with the board, as I mentioned, was about a little over a month ago. And then we also had a superintendent, parent, and community advisory council that presented to last week, as well as our community council that we presented to this past Monday and got some great feedback. So again, we've been right up until this point having conversations with multiple different stakeholders to make sure what we're presenting here is hitting the mark. So now into the content. So this vision and mission, I want to make sure we start here. This was revised by the board in 2018. So this is the vision and mission that has guided this organization for the past couple of years. We did not tweak this at all. I think the board and administration felt like this was still aligned with the direction of the organization, but just wanted to put this up on a slide as obviously these things are staying, and it is very aligned to what we did work on, which was the values. So we have 5 established values here to ground our work and support our culture. And so I'll give you just a minute to read those values on the left and then the related statements on the right. All right, it's important to know we started with probably 25, 30, if not more values, and had multiple surveys we put out to the community that asked for direct feedback on these, got feedback during those town halls, feedback from our principals twice, and so we've whittled this down into 5 that I think are very powerful and again speak directly to our belief system as an organization. And so then moving on to strategic priorities, again, I think there's probably no better time than now to, in terms of the need to focus, right? With so much going on in our country, in our city, and in our communities. And so what you see on the left, those are the priorities we outlined in the 1920 annual plan. So last school year, a lot of that work is ongoing. And so what you see on the right is we've essentially distilled our value statements into 4 value statements: increase access to rigorous curriculum instruction, promote racial equity, foster authentic engagement, and operate and fund strategically. So moving from 6 to 4. And then each one of those priorities has a number of related initiatives, but as I've mentioned, we are really honing in on 8, so that those are 8 that are starting this school year. And so on the left-hand side of this slide are the priorities. On the right-hand side are the related initiatives, and again, I know that's kind of small and hard to see. Underneath each one of these initiatives are a number of milestones and action steps that our team utilizes to progress monitor, but did just want to highlight a few of these initiatives, things that we've already seen take place as an organization. 1.1, support teachers and school leaders to advance a comprehensive literacy framework by implementing the pre-K through 12 ELA curriculum. So that is work that Dr. Morgan, Dr. Henderson, and their teams have been pushing forward even in our virtual context that speaks directly to some of the challenges that we saw play out in the organizational diagnostic. And then, of course, our presentation earlier this evening around 2.1, which has passed the IPS Racial Equity Board policy and implement related district-wide framework. So again, we've already been moving forward on a number of these initiatives and will continue to do so. So then from a next step perspective, as I've mentioned, we will work to finalize the scorecard by fall 2020. So we actually have an additional community council meeting in September to bring our draft to them to get some feedback. Of course, we'll take it to our principals before it comes to you. And again, we're hoping that that is done at some point in the fall of 2020. Obviously, it is incredibly important to set goals so that we can work backwards and really be able to articulate where we want to go. In one note, I wrote it down in my notes here, just the previous conversation that Courtney was leading. On the draft scorecard, there is a metric when we talk about Commissioner O'Connor holding ourselves accountable to doing better. So there's an equity metric. So we'll have on that scorecard buckets where we will bring that information to the board on an annual basis. And one of these metrics is called relative risk ratio, which is the percentage of Black male students who receive special education that is over the percentage of Black or of non-African American male special education students who are suspended. And so that is something that we have been tracking very closely over the past couple of years, and I think is directly related to something that we should be pushing out and holding ourselves accountable to from a goal perspective. And so not looking at the scorecard tonight, but that's how we'll start to make some of those connections. And so appreciated that conversation that took place in the last presentation. And then from a rollout perspective, we're kind of looking at our conversation tonight as a soft launch. Again, it is really important that we internally are aligned, and so much has been happening over the past 6-7 months, and our team has been doing amazing in terms of making sure that we are all on the same page and getting the organization on the same page to move forward. So I can't articulate how important it is, for us to be able to have this conversation tonight and then start pushing out these values and priorities internally. And so we have plans to do that. And then from a kind of more intentional launch perspective, wanted to be mindful that there's obviously just a lot going on right now. And so we've really been focused on school opening and then how we continue to matriculate throughout the school year. So we'll continue to stay focused on that. But we will be holding our second annual State of the District on September 30th. We'll use that setting to officially launch this plan and focus on our values and priorities with the community, with some of our external stakeholders. And obviously, we'll build out additional plans to intentionally roll this out over the course of the year. But again, being very mindful that right now we're very focused on school start. And so wanted to get your approval this evening so that we could keep moving internally, and we'll start pushing this out externally starting into September. And that is all I had.
Questions? Commissioner Moore?
Question C, and no questions this time, but just a comment. I appreciate all the work that you've done on this. I've watched it evolve. I think it is definitely a good tool, and I think we can do great things with this. So that's all I have to say. C.
Wow. No follow-up? Oh, okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Hawkins?
Yeah, I'll just also say, as admittedly someone who struggles with being concise, I appreciate the fact that we're going from 6 strategic priorities to 4 and being very clear and specific. So I appreciate that. Then also, Superintendent Johnson, and just thank you to you and your team for keeping the candle burning during a pandemic on this important vision, because this requires, even though we're in this moment right now, struggling through this unprecedented time in our history, we still have to think forward, continue to envision our future and how we serve our students. So just appreciate that.
Commissioner Arnold?
I too appreciate all the work that's gone into it, and especially the fact that there's very tangible benchmarks. I think too often we do strategic planning and create something and don't look at it for 5 years and then look and say, well, let's do another one, or let's look at the end of the 5 years. So I very much appreciate the specificity and that there are certain things we're going to be looking at, and we're not going to do too much the first year. So I think that's really important, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into this.
Any commissioners on the phone have any questions or comments?
I do not this time. Thank you for the work, though.
Thank you, Andrew, for the work, and looking forward to us working with it and with you more. Thank you.
Great. So do I have a motion to approve the values, strategic priorities, and initiatives for the updated 2025 strategic plan as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Mullen, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold?
Yes.
Commissioner Gore?
Yes.
Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Commissioner Slack?
Yes.
Secretary Collins?
Yes.
Vice President Hawkins?
Yes.
President O'Connor?
Yes.
Motion carries.
That's the end of superintendent
it.
presentation. Good. Do I have, does any commissioner wish to offer closing comments this evening?
See, you know I do.
Commissioner Moore? Now, you only
I've
get
just
one
been-
closing
I've
comment.
been very talkative today. I'm proud of myself. No, I just want to thank the superintendent and the administration for all the stuff, for all the things they've been doing to ensure that our children get started off to a great start. And I especially want to thank our teachers as they begin to try to develop a new way of learning and recognizing that they had to adjust and move around and do a lot of different things. And for that, I truly appreciate it. And for the families, for the actual mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and cousins and grandmamas and uncles who have been sitting there with their children trying to ensure that they're learning each and every day. And for all that, I'm thankful, and I'm sure our children will benefit greatly from it.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Commissioner Moore, you said that so well. I would say in a very concise way that I want to thank our parents, especially our teachers, for your patience and your adaptability during this time period. And just again, kudos to the superintendent, the administration, principals, teachers, for all the effort and planning that went into to get to day 9, which is an incredible accomplishment. So just can't thank everyone enough for that. I would be, though, remiss if I didn't acknowledge what recently transpired, though, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And, once again, a black man was shot, and this time was shot 7 times in front of his children. And so I'll say that again, he was shot in front of his children for all of us to see on TV over and over again on our TV or device. My prayers go out to Mr. Blake, his family, as well as the community of Kenosha, Wisconsin during this difficult time. I will tell you that I'm tired. I'm tired of having the same discussion with my daughters, and forgive me for becoming emotional. But my 5 and 9-year-old need to know what's going on. And it's a painful conversation to have, but it's the truth. However, I want to reiterate that the work that's being done here at IPS in this district, which is more than math, science, and arithmetic and literature, but it's also about hope and fairness and truth. And that's evidenced in Dr. Payne's famous and infamous quote about the movement, not just a moment. So I'm hopeful, I'm very hopeful, and I have to remain hopeful, that our students who are watching the same videos that we are watching, digesting the same back and forth, all of the rhetoric, all the conversations that are happening in our media, just as we are as well as they digest this. I just want them to remember that they are loved, you are cherished, and that we expect and hope that you will continue to demand more from adults and us and your community. So thank you.
Commissioner Arnold.
That's a hard act to follow, but I support and approve both comments made by the commissioners. And I just want parents to know that we hear you. We read your comments. We're sensitive to what's going on, and we know this is really difficult times. It's difficult for everybody. No one anticipated that school would start this way. But I think we're optimistic and hopeful that students will be back in school. But just want parents to know that we hear you, we understand, we can't fix everything and we can't make everyone happy, but we really want to do what's best for your children. And thanks to all the people that are working to make that happen, from the superintendent and her leadership team, to teachers, to building leaders, to the food service people that are still fixing food that's going out, and to everyone that's involved. And so, I will say what our superintendent says, which is just give yourself some grace that, things will continue to unfold. We're almost 2 weeks in. I know there's still, I hear and see that there are still some issues. Kudos to the IT team. I hear that they work so hard and have really been diligent in trying to fix the issues that are going on. So difficult times, but we hear you, we feel your pain, and hopefully we're going to get through this and move forward.
Commissioner Gore, I heard you have a comment.
Yes. I'd just like to send congrats to Pat Payne again for all of her hard work. Being on the board when Pat was working with IPS as a moment, and thanking goodness that she's still here for a movement. Hearing Commissioner Hawkins' words are very moving as an African-American male and as a mother, grandmother of African-American males. My sentiments are the same. They go out to the family and families that have had to suffer these kinds of endurances during this time. I'd also like to say, as a school board, I'm very happy to, a board member, happy to be on the board at this time as we work with Black Lives Matter, and not only to make school good for all of our students, but to understand that we do have our black and brown students who need us to be sure that they are equally taken care of. I'd also like to thank our leadership. I'd like to thank our superintendent and her team, who I know that this isn't easy. What is it, maybe going into our 10th or 11th day now? And I know that there are some challenges, but I think you have done a great job, and just like to thank you for all your hard work.
Commissioner Slack, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, I do. I would like to say that echo the same thing that many other commissioners have said before me. I thank Evan for his, Commissioner Hawkins for his moving words. You can't top that. I have a husband that's a black male, and it's hard conversation to have with your kids. And I am so happy for the place that we are right now as a board and the movement that has taken place. And I also want to thank the administration for all the hard work that they have done, but not just them, because they haven't done it alone. But these teachers have been struggling and been out there on the front lines. I appreciate them. I appreciate the IT department that has probably gotten so many calls during the week. And I also like to thank our parents, because I'm one of those parents that are at home. And it's not easy, and it's not going to be perfect. But we can do this together, and we got to October. Let's just buckle up and do what we have to do for our kids. Number one thing is they're at home and they're safe. So at the end of that, I just say thank you guys for working together.
I
Commissioner
cannot
Collins.
add anything that hasn't already been said, and I'm very grateful for everybody.
And I would, in short order, thank our superintendent and her team, our school-level administrators, our students. It's I think we used the word resiliency. I think I'm proud of the resiliency we've seen from everybody. And what Commissioner Arnold said, we do hear parents, and we are charting a course that we think is in the best interest of everyone to do this the right way and not have to stop halfway through something. So I think we've made the right decision. I also want to comment that, it's appropriate we were able to present Dr. Payne the plaque tonight. It's also appropriate that as we talk about these things that we do recognize that we were confronted with another unarmed black man getting shot in the back 7 times, and that we seem to be here frequently, and I firmly believe the work we're doing through the educational system as not just the school system, but the solutions to our problem lie in the work that we're doing to make sure that our children receive the equity they deserve. And I appreciate each and every one of you, either on the phone or sitting up here with me tonight, that has committed yourself to that equity, and that I don't know if any of you saw Doc Rivers from the NBA yesterday, who said, we love this country, we just don't feel like it loves us back, and that it is our job to make sure that that love is shared and that we stand up and protect people and make sure that the truth is told. And I will remain committed to do that. And I appreciate the work we do together in making that happen. Superintendent.
Thank you. So I will read my brief comments. We've been quite busy as a district, as you all know, as our school year began last Monday. I again want to echo Commissioner's thanks and gratitude to our teachers, staff, families, and students for the resilience and flexibility that they've demonstrated. We are learning and working together to create a valuable learning experience for our students, and we're also working to get better at that every day. Over the past 9 days, our teams have put forth incredible efforts to be constant problem solvers and responsive to concerns that we hear. I'm incredibly proud of their work and their continued commitment to our students and families. I had the opportunity to personally teach my first virtual lesson on Tuesday to a 4th grade class, and it was tough. And so I have an enormous appreciation for our teachers and the work that they are doing right now in navigating. We are continuing to provide meal service to our students across 55 different sites so that our families have that support, and we will actually begin evening service hours starting on Monday for families so we can accommodate a broader range of family schedules. Our food service team has continued to be just simply remarkable in responding to community needs during this time, and so I want to thank Dina Bond and her team under Scott Martin's leadership for the work they've done. We are also partnering with community organizations across the district to stand up our first round of student support network sites to create additional supervised spaces for our students who need them. And so lots of gratitude and thanks to Ashley Scott, Sarah Robinson Chin, and Christian Strickland for their work in continuing to stand those sites up. What we know for certain is we are all looking forward to being back in person with our students. I am encouraged by our health data for our county, which has actually moved in quite a positive direction over the last 4 weeks. When we made the recommendation to be in a full remote learning context to this board, our county positivity rate was above 9%. And in 4 weeks' time, our 7-day positivity rate is now in the 6% range and even 5% when you look at specific metrics on the Indiana State Department of Health dashboard. So that said, I have quite a bit of optimism that if we all continue to do our part, wear our masks, socially distance, wash our hands, we'll be positioned to return back to school in early October. Finally, as Commissioner Hawkins has highlighted, and we continue to see the ugly impacts of racism, both individual and systemic, I want to ensure that our students, families, and staff know that we see them, we value them, and most importantly, we love them, and that we will continue in times, especially when it is inconvenient for us, to hold ourselves responsible for speaking up and for advocating for them and with them. And that will be all my comments for this evening.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. Our next scheduled meeting is our work session on Tuesday, September 15th. We will continue to monitor guidance from the governor with regards to the emergency status and communicate any updates or changes to the September meeting schedule in the next week. Having completed all the items on the agenda, this meeting stands adjourned.
Good night. Stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.